Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being with us today. It's such a pleasure to be your host and moderator. My name is Anna Rold, and I am the CEO and publisher of Diplomatic Courier magazine. And it's so wonderful to be with you today. I hope everyone has a moment to cool down and be present for this conversation that we're about to have. Without further ado, I wanted to give you a little bit of context about the conversation we'll be having today. But before I do all of that, let me also introduce our speakers today that I have the pleasure of being here with. First, to my left, we have Gabriela Hurst, a fashion designer and entrepreneur from Uruguay. Thank you, Gabriela. Second, we have Cyrille Vigneron, chairman of Cartier Culture and Philanthropy. And then next we have Samira Nasr, editor-in-chief of Harper Bazaar from USA. And last but not least, Masataka Hosoo, president and CEO of Hosoo Company Limited in Japan. So thank you again. So I'll take a moment to very briefly give us a little bit of context about the conversation today. As you know, today's theme is about, it will include circularity, regeneration, and sustainability with a focus on design materials, architecture, fashion, spirituality, but also the humanities. Most specifically and especially the human journey of transition and how we learn a lot of the things that we think are modern or just about from today. They're actually traditions that have been around for a very long time. I also wanted to give you some context on the Expo Osaka and why this is such an important topic for us today. It's part of the context that Expo Osaka has chosen, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And the goal specifically that we're going to be talking about today is about Goal 12 on consumption. And it's an important time in human history because it's the first time, and this is why this goal is so important, where it's everyone's business to solve humanity's biggest challenges. And that means that it's no longer just heads of states and ministers and leaders, but also everyday people and businesses and all stakeholders. And so that's why such an important topic to have a conversation about. I wanted to ask you, Cyrille, as our host here, but also someone I've had the pleasure of getting to know for a bit now, to help us connect the dots on how the Women's Pavilion came into existence. It's the second iteration, the first one being in Dubai. I'd love to know a little bit about the themes and what ties it all together.
Thank you, Anna. So yes, it's the second Women Pavilion in the 21st century. There had been one in Vienna in the beginning of the 20th century, but it was how to have the world have a look on women. But what I tried to do after that, because there was no more Women's Pavilion, it was only State Pavilion that come to a universal exhibition. And in Dubai, the minister in charge thought there was something missing. Women represent half of humanity, but in many countries they are underrepresented. Meaning if we only represent countries, we can never represent women as a whole. And so it's not a kind of having a look at women, but to see the women's perspective on the world and what they can bring. And the theme of Dubai was when women thrive, humanity thrives. I mean, it's not a question only on women to women, but women for the world. And try to having not only one of a kind, but then to move it from Dubai to Osaka. So as soon as the exhibition closed, Expo in Dubai, then the team started to team up to say how can we bring in Japan. Initially, it was not part of the Japan Expo to have a women pavilion, but many of the participants and the Expo committee in Dubai were women and say we absolutely have to do it. So came to visit the Japanese government with our CEO here and say we have to do it here. And the government said okay. But it was interesting, it was not part of the agenda initially. But finally, it's come here just next to Japan Pavilion, which shows also a commitment in there. Trying to have the same theme, when women thrive, humanity thrive, but to have another one, and there were two other themes. One linked to the togetherness, so tomoni Kagayaku Mirai E. So we shine together, we live together, and we create the future together. But also a link on regeneration and Mother Earth. So with the architect and designer, Nagayama Yuko, who had done the Japan Pavilion in Dubai, thought, how can we have continuity and how physically this pavilion can express regeneration? Knowing that this expo, on reverse differently from Dubai, this expo will be unmounted entirely. It's mounted here and all the buildings will be removed to do something else with them. While in Dubai, it created an expo city which is repurposed from other things. So the Dubai expo site welcomed the COP28, for instance, become international center. So it stays. And physically the Women Pavilion in there stayed as well. But this one will be unmounted. So how can we have both the link and a physical expression of regeneration? So the symbolic part that came, the facade that you can see with this origami type of triangle, was unmounted from the Japan Pavilion in Dubai, has been stored and has been remounted in a different way. It's been repurposed, showing that architecture, even if it does permanent building, can do things which can be mounted, remounted, reused, and find another beauty in them. So it physically expresses what can be regeneration. Look at old things with new eyes and do new things with them. Everything was done also to be like an old Japanese house, a machiya, meaning you enter from some narrow angle, you come inside and you have then nature inside. There is a garden inside on this floor, but there is also a room which is open to the sky in the middle. So you're part of it, and it represents something very old in Japanese culture and very new here. Everything also unmounted or taken away. So all the plants in here will be replanted in nature later. So they are grown here and they will be reused. All these chairs will be given to schools afterwards, and everything that can be reused from all the construction will be reused. So it's both permanent building for 6 months, impermanent because it will be destroyed in some way, but it's not be destroyed, unmounted and reused for other purpose. And that's what we have to think of when we think of circularity, how to bring beauty from one place to another, look at the old things with new eyes, protect what we have, and continuously reuse in a better way. And not just use, consume, destroy, and discard. So reduce, reuse, recycle, and rethink. So the building expresses that in its own conception.
And it's such a beautiful way of paying homage to the Expo itself, because the Expo does this in general. A lot of the historical, beautiful buildings that you see around the world, or everything from Eiffel Tower, the Universal Exposition back in the day, to other items tend to have that Expo legacy. So I wanted to maybe start with you, Gabrielle, and then Samira and Masataka. From your own vantage points and work you've done, how do you see that expressed, this kind of circularity in your own work? We'll start with you, Gabby.
Circularity is as old as humankind, and it's the way we've lived in antiquity. We can trace this back to Neolithic times, or even before. And in my personal life is how I grew up in a ranch. There's nothing more circular than growing up in a ranch. So applying that to my professional life, when we did our first show, we were using also tables and chairs, and everything of the show was repurposed. Because we want to do things, doesn't mean that it has to have an effect in nature. And you see there's a pleasure on repurposing. The objects have a history. These are beautiful chairs that will go to schools, and there's a positivity that recreates. And I believe that regeneration is as natural as it's the natural cycle of nature. Everything about us will regenerate eventually as well.
And I'll get back to that discussion in a little bit, but I'd love to hear from you, Samira. And that's you, Gabby, right?
Yeah, no, that's my mother.
That's your mother.
Yes.
I think for myself, and in the approach in terms of how we cover it at Harper's Bazaar, I'm a firm believer that caring about a beautiful thing it just reflects an intellectual curiosity. And I think with that intellectual curiosity becomes a curiosity about yourself and your place in the world. And with that comes a value proposition about what you care about and how you care for things. And that is something that I'm constantly trying to explore in our work. And it's not so much a literal circularity as much as it is storytelling and how we can expand acceptance and reinforce messaging around this idea that when you have beautiful things, it's not to discard, it's to wear them and to enjoy them and to keep them in use. And that if something gets a scratch or a tear or a little, bang, that's your story and that's the thing that you bring to this item, and that's to be treasured. And I think that's very much sort of the work that we do, is creating dialogue and space around this idea of enjoying things and keeping them, and maybe consuming less, but consuming things of quality that you can have for a long time.
And that concept is so interesting, right? That something tears or there's a snag, you can repair it, and that makes it also beautiful at the same time.
Very much so.
Masataka, I wanted to go to you, and this is also something that you see in your own work, being the 10th generation in your own, in your company. We'd love to hear from you.
はい、ありがとうございます。日本語で喋りますね。はい。循環テーマにって我々京都で西陣織と織物をやっておりまして、私今12代目になります。でやっぱり西陣というと1200年の歴史がありまして、ある意味そういった織物、美しい織物と1200年間にわたって受け継いできたと。で未だにやっぱり300年前また1000年前の織物もですね、今この手元に日本に残っていて、そういったことを目にしたり手に取ったりすることもできる。ある意味そういった美しいものっていうのは人の性を超えてですね、どんどんジェネレーションを超えていく。でまた着物っていう構造にしても母から娘へと、着物は基本的にはサイズレス、お箸織りっていうのを使うことによって、サイズを調整することができたり、また着物は13メートル14メートルぐらいの長さをですね8つのパーツに分解するんですね。一切捨てるところがないスクエアのパーツに分解して、でこれを縫い上げると着物の形になると。でこれ和裁と洋裁の違いもそうなんですが、和裁の場合はですね取り外しやすいように縫うんですね。それなぜかというと、親から子供に渡す時とかですね、一回それを分解してまた反物に戻して、それを新品同様に洗ったり、また擦れてるパーツを入れ替えることで美しいものを世代を超えてですね使い続けていく、こういった思想がすでにもう何百年も前から着物っていう構造の中にあるという、ここは非常に大きなヒントに今なるんじゃないかなというふうに思います。
And I wanted to comment that not only in Japan, but in the Roman Empire, the peplum was a kind of a long toge that can be also adjusted. It basically fit to anybody, like the kimono can fit basically any body shape. And this had been kind of worn for 1,000 years. And in Middle East currently with the abaya, something similar that can be transmitted from mothers to daughter, because it's basically a kind of fluid shape that can work. So the design were made for something which were comfortable to wear in the country they were, and also could be reused quite a long time. Another comment about how to reuse things, very Japanese, which is for tableware or porcelain when it's broken, called kintsugi. The way to take those broken parts, to put some gold inside, and to make it new and beautiful again. So how to have things that can be remended and become even more beautiful afterwards is something very Japanese.
I've been seeing a lot of pictures. That's Uruguay, by the way. That's where I grew up, exactly where I grew up. And there was a picture of my father and talking about, he was wearing a poncho, for example, which is back to the tradition of garments that are passed down. It would take years to make a poncho because they're weaved by hand and shredded, dyed with nature. So those ponchos get handed down. The tradition of having down, that's my dad. The tradition of getting things passed on is still in places where there's scarcity or there's still a love for tradition. You can still feel that quite vibrant. And when we talk about regeneration, I think it made me think about, because there's a picture of my mother and I as a baby sitting on a wool just passed. We were in a wool bale. Wool is one of the most long used fibers in the world and one of the most sustainable fibers that regenerates. And in Roman times, as you were mentioning, Europe was dressed with linen, leather, and wool. Those are the three main fabrics that if we wanted to be sustainable today, those are still, the technology is here. We don't have to invent anything new.
You know, I find that very interesting. What's old becomes new again. So I'd love to hear your opinions on that. That sustainability is not something that was just discovered recently because of the need for it, because of our planet, but it's always been there. So what are some things we can learn from tradition that can help us, make what's old new again?
I mean, I don't know if I can speak to tradition, but I certainly can speak to what we value and how we care for the things that we have. And this idea that new is not necessarily better. And that having things and enjoying them and passing them on, there's beauty in that, or there's beauty in thinking about what you're going to put your money to. And I think there's a conversation around circularity, certainly, but there's also just a conversation around consumption and what that means and how we consume and the value that we attach to having more, and the shift that maybe needs to occur in that. Maybe it's not always about more. It's about bringing things into our lives and using them and enjoying them and delighting in them and reinventing them, reimagining, and that speaks to the idea of imagination, but reimagining what they could be and how they could come into our lives. I think that's also a very, very important part of the conversation of just consumption and being gentle to our planet and our communities.
Absolutely. Yes, Cyrille.
I think for especially our Western eyes, we have to reconsider two opposite sides that I think we have got in some way a bit wrong. One is on the what we call the housing, real estate, that we say we build things which consider are permanent and have to stay there in some way forever. And on the other side, things which are consumable. And more were consumable, disposable, and things. And we've been used to say things are simpler if we just use and discard. Even for cars, engines, or everything. Even for mobile phone now, we just cannot repair. We just replace. And that's a problem too. But architecture should not be seen as something that prominent. And I would say this building will be repurposed, and it's better. 2 weeks ago when I came, after we went to the Shima and the Issei Jingu, and the Issei temple is destroyed or unmounted every 20 years, rebuilt in the same way it was done 1,500 years ago for spirit to stay permanent. But the building itself becomes entirely new. So it 10 years ago, it was brand new at that time, and it's become a little more kind of colored, and in 8 years it will be rebuilt. But it's rebuilt in the same way, and the beams are reused for other temple. So it's both impermanent in its structure and permanent in its mind. But on the other side, when you take daily things, especially clothes, we should not see them as consumable, but something to protect preciously because they are rare as well. So if we think that what we see is permanent, in fact, is not, and what we see is consumable, in fact, is permanent and regenerative, then we can have a much more balanced view. But it's a full reshift. So we don't invest in permanent things. We just put the same effort in both. It's the same.
I would also add to that the idea of hands, working hands, the hands that crafted the thing that you delight in, the hands that crafted the thing that you make. I mean, I think that's a really big part of it, and recognizing that the things that we have, there's a person behind that. There's a process of making behind that, and I think when we can, a way to honor that process and that tradition is to utilize that thing because time and effort and care went into the making.
I think there's, when we talking about the past, we also talk about including we are based in two values, long-term view and sustainability. I think when you are crafting with the best materials you can find and the best hands, right? So it's both the social component of what you're doing and the materials that you're doing that construct a garment that not only looks good and feel good, but that also brings the intention of the design. The design needs to be timeless. Everything that we make can be worn 10 years from now or 10 years ago. And I think that's what, when we talk about the past and tradition, respecting the natural fibers, respecting the regeneration. If you would give me a magic wand today and I could change the way we're going to consume and make clothes, I would say that in the future I would love to see 50% of everything being made from repurposed materials because of the scarcity of natural resources that is happening, and the other 50% with complete verticality. Like we would know where that linen was produced, in which area. We would know where this wool came. We would know where this leather came, all traceable back to. So in my magic wand, there is a way we can achieve this, which is by using regenerative that we can basically go from beginning to end of the process and using a lot of the existing. There's so much existing already that can be reutilized.
Yeah, I find it very interesting from everything that I heard from you, that tradition helps us sort of understand that this process is not that difficult. It's been done before.
Yes.
You know, that balance that you were talking about, Cyrille, it's just a shift in the mindset. But also that modern technology innovation can also help us make things, you know, understand the process even better.
Traceability.
Exactly. Masataka, would you say that that's sort of this similar to the work that you're doing, especially when you were talking about something as traditional and time enduring as the kimono?
そうですね。今我々取り組んでいるところで、逆に平安時代の自然染色の、リサーチとですね、実際その染色も行っています。でそこを突き詰めていくと、本当植物が絶滅危惧種になっていたりするんですけども、じゃあ植物を育てることを始めると。で今京都の中にですね、畑を自社で作って、今日本紫という植物、もともとはこれは関院12階の一番蔵の高いですね、古木紫って昔は天皇家しか着ることが許されなかった、こういったものをですね、今復活さそうということでやってるんですね。で非常にこれも高山植物で暑さに弱いということで、昔は京都市内でも紫野ってエリアがあって紫を育てたんですが、今温暖化でそれが育たないと。ただやはりこれを京都で復活させたいということで、さまざまなですね、土壌の専門家も来ていただきながら、また栽培方法も、今のテクノロジー分析もしながらですね、やっていくことで、なんとか今年5年目なんですけども、この日本紫の栽培に成功して、でまたこの横にですね、工房を作って、やっぱり自然染色が食と同じで取れたてのものをですね、いい水でですね、水もやっぱり軟水が大事なんですけど、井戸水を引いて、で職人がですね、しかるべき技術とタイミングでやっていくって、すごく手間暇をかけていくと。でまたこれ出来上がったものって非常に美しい色出るんですけども、やっぱり取れた年によっても違うし、個体によっても違ってくると。ともすれば今の工業的な社会でいくと、色がそれぞれ違うのはダメだというふうになるんですが、一方でこれフランスのワインとかの世界でいくと、それぞれのテノワールに合わせた個体の美があるっていう、これって本当に染色の世界だけではなくて、今の人間社会にもとっても言える一つの問いなのかなというふうに思っておりまして、やはり自然染色を身にまとうということは、ともすれば土壌のこと、自然環境のこと、また自然を身にまとうということでもあるなというふうに思っておりまして、それを通して今僕たちもどういうような形でですね、調和を取りながら、そこを考えないことには本当の意味での今の美っていうのは定義できないんじゃないかなというふうにも考えていますね。
Yeah, thank you so much. And actually, these are such important points about how to marry the modern with tradition. And there's definitely an opportunity there, Cyrille.
Or how we have to relearn how to use natural things from where they are, like fruit from where they come in season. So now it's the end of the Japanese Miyazaki mango, which are super good. And will come soon the momo and the Japanese peach are just incredibly sweet, but only in June and July. And then will come the kyoho, the grapes. And if you have never eaten Japanese grapes, you have nothing. So there is a beauty of the fruit in season, because with modern world we can have everything all the time. But when the fruit takes much of the space and the time in boats or in plane, then there's nothing to compare in taste. So instead of trying to have everything all the time, just to appreciate the pleasure of things done, where they are done, in which region, on which soil, which care, and that's also a kind of pleasure we can rediscover.
Yeah, Gabriella, I bet you have a
Yeah,
lot to
I
say
mean,
on this.
I mean, it's true. It's truly the philosophy. When we open a store, we even, let's say, if it's in California, like the last store that we opened, we use fallen trees. We always use reclaimed wood, sycamore trees. We try to do everything that it's local, and as someone that grew up in a farm and ate with the cycles of nature and eating fruit directly from the trees and knowing when grapes are, there's nothing more delicious. And I feel that in a way inform my neural pathways. So there's like a natural way of function that I grew up. That doesn't make me better than somebody that grew up in the city. It's just like an information that I have in me, that I know certain cycles that it respects. And if you just do this, actually, that's a picture in my mom's ranch with 110 horses for her 70th birthday. And it's the same bloodline of horses that for 8 generations my family has had. And I think that knowing the seasons and working with the cycles, it just makes everything better. But everything we eat, everything we wear, and it's what's very important of what we were talking about natural dyes. It's the biggest organ that we have is our skin. So the fabrics that we use in our body are really important. So yeah, the more natural, the better, because it's breeding.
And wearing Japanese yukata in this season is just so perfect. It's simple, it's light on the skin, it's nothing better.
I find this so fascinating, especially when you were talking, Gabby, this idea that everything we need is around us and we need to harness what we have. And you said, it's not a question of living in the country versus in the city. Maybe in the city, you see this now, and a lot of cities are trying to have this farm-to-table approach or trying to source things locally. What I'm really interested in, maybe I'll go back to you, Samira, is you mentioned the value proposition. I'd love to dive into that topic a little bit more. What does it mean to propose a value that's better maybe for our consumption? And is the consumer in charge? Does the consumer have enough agency to do that?
I think now more than ever, I think when there's scarcity, there's less choice. When there's scarcity, you take what's in front of you. But I think now with information, I think the consumer is smarter and wiser than ever. And I think with choice comes, that's when you have to sort of really think about the story that you're telling the consumer. And I think it needs to get back to values. And I think that that's how the consumer responds, is they feel something in the product and they identify their values with the values of, the thing that is being sold. But I think it starts at home. It's conversations that we have at home. It's how we're raising people. It's media, myself, and the work that we do in supporting these values and in broadcasting them in maybe subtle and not so subtle ways, and creating conversation around these ideas to make people think about how they're consuming and what they look for in product, right? Like, I think a lot of luxury is choice. It's the power, it is an incredible luxury in 2025 to simply have choice as women, as men, like just to have autonomy. And so when we can make informed decisions about the choices we make and lean into the things that we identify with, I think those are the conversations we need to have, and that's how you educate a consumer. And I think ultimately it's only good business to honor these values and to live by them, because I think that the consumer is smarter and they will hold people to task. And because there is choice, they don't need to buy this or that, they can go there, right? So you have to live by the thing that you're broadcasting.
Yeah, and am I hearing correct that it's good business to also espouse these traditions? Because
Yeah.
the consumer can tell the difference.
Well, I mean, I definitely, I always think that long and steady wins the race. And I can see it in my business. I've worked for other companies as well, where we were able to grow the company double digits by doing it in the right way. So I always have a personal thing when people say, oh, well, sustainability costs more for business. I'm like, no. Since when being thoughtful, really accountable for things they're doing and not wasteful is bad for business. It's always bad for business. It just takes a little bit more thinking, and it takes a little bit more of asking. And so much has changed since we launched our company. Now you can find recycled cashmeres that you couldn't find before, recycled cotton. Our denim is all made out of recycled cotton. You can find all these things that they were not so available. And this is just in 10 years. It's remarkable, everything that is happening in how much the industry changed. And this is not what to say that there's more that needs to be changed, but every single supplier that we work in Italy have all their certifications of their water usage, of if they're using renewables to produce the garments. There's so much more progress that sometimes get not told in all the stories, but I see even the packaging of our product is 100% recycled. Polyester, and that sweater is done by a non-for-profit in Uruguay called Manos del Uruguay, which supports women in my country with the best cashmere in the world, which is GTI. You always have to, by the way, make sure that you trace where the cashmere comes from, because as the cashmere populated, the goats eat right from the roots, so they have expanded the Gobi Desert. So it's very important to use high-quality cashmere. And those are our hamburgers, which are recycled cotton, because 99% of all hangers that are plastic end up in landfills. Mm-hmm. So why? We don't need to do, plastic hangers. Nobody needs to.
Mm-hmm. I do have a question for you, actually. You talked about sort of the environmental conditions changing sort of what you can grow, and then that sort of affects the product. There's an interesting conversation to be had there about teaching people that if something is different, so like maybe one year it looks one way and another year it looks another way, that like there's beauty in difference. And I think that it's something that I think about a lot, just this idea of we get accustomed to everything being the same. We get accustomed to, I bought these last time and this is what they looked like, or this is what they tasted like, and it doesn't taste like that or doesn't look like that now, so it's not good. And it's this idea that I think we have to cultivate, that when you are playing in the sort of natural world, that things are going to be different, but that doesn't make it less valuable or interesting. I don't know, I'm just sort of tinkering in real time with this idea, but I think it's really beautiful.
Yeah, it's actually something that we applied. For example, there's certain types of people like very homogenic things, right? And when you're doing, let's say, leather boots, and you want to do them in a vegetable tan, something that is much more less damaging for the environment, we have to put a disclaimer. This is a natural process. There's going to be a difference because nature is not exact. So I think this is a very important way to instruct the consumer that have been used to that homogenic industrialization of product, which in our industry, which is supposedly luxury, we have to really revert back from that supermarket mentality in a way.
How do you approach that?
そうですね、やっぱり物っていうのは全部関係性だと思うんですね。作った人、それを使う人、また例えば工芸品なんかはその背景に自然というものがあって、そこの関係性考えるということは自然のことも考えるし、使う人、また作った人のことも考えていく。そこの信頼関係ができてくると、全く同じものじゃなくてもこの人に委ねていく。また工芸品はお直しっていう概念が日本の工芸品にありまして、基本的には修理することを前提に作っていくんですね。ですから着物の構造もそうですし、もう前提としてそれがちゃんとその中に含まれていく。つまりそれはどういうことかというと、物を通して関係性を育んでいく。またこれが人のジェネレーションも超えていく。 こういったものが本来あったと、そこに学ぶべきところは多いかなというふうに思いますね。
Beautiful. Yes.
Yes, I think there are the two opposite sides of it, but overall, I think we tend to value too much what is new and what is standardized. So if we look at what is not new and not standardized, there is a beauty in it. So to mention, the best example is wine. We all know that each year has a different taste, and it's part of it, and it's part of the art of tasting wine. And this taste evolves. So the moment where the taste is good, and then it goes over time, it's too late. So we have to be patient, we have to wait when it's the right time to drink the right year. And that's how it is. And Robert Mondavi had said, if you make good wine, you follow nature, not Wall Street. If you follow Wall Street, you make bad wine. And that's something we always have to have in mind. But there can be also something where if you anchor your design in kind of a long time and it's sufficiently stable, then you cannot date them and you can continue to enjoy all the time. So you wear a beautiful necklace, but few people know it was designed 60 years ago because it looks very modern. So time doesn't really matter. So if you can anchor, as we were saying about peplum or about kimono, things in a kind of long-lasting design, you can continuously renew them and they continuously look new and look existing at the same time. So we have to not to value only newness, but to value what is anchored in a long time. And some have merit in being stable, and some have merit in being constantly different each time. Which means if we think less about time like a linear, as something come from yesterday to today and tomorrow, thinking tomorrow things will be better than yesterday, but things like Japan mostly in cycle. In cycle, the before and after is the same. Meaning summer is after spring, but it's also before the next spring. And so there is a season to like something, and then you put them in the drawer, and the next year you will find something else that maybe is older, but come to be right to the next season. Same for food. You enjoy the food in season, and you prepare mentally for it. So if we think time as cycle, which is circular, then we know how to have the past and the present melting in something that can last. And new generation liking something similar. So my daughter would like something like this. And it's suitable for all generation. So it's not something good for the young, good for the old, or good for now, for the future. It can be good all the time, and you can continuously learn how to love it again and again and again.
I mean, timeless design sometimes has this like quotation of that it's not, that it's misperceived in modern context, but I can look at a pair of earrings made in Greek antiquity and they're the most modern pieces of jewelry that I've ever seen, and I think that is this idea of trend, which I'm not good at. Sometimes we hit a trend just by mistake, but it's not something that I can even comprehend. But designing something that lasts, right? It's really back to the repurposing. It's like I go back to where I grew up. I was sitting in my great-grandmother's chairs, and I learned about quality from a utilitarian long-term usage of things, because you can just not go to a store and buy things. It just takes 2 hours and a half to go. So this idea of timeless design with the materials that are respectful for the process is just really modern, even if it's really using values from the past, again, to what his family is doing for more than 10 generations.
And it can be good business. That's what we did for Cartier in the past 10 years to make it iconic, and it being kind of extremely successful and more than before, and attractive to all generations. Not to have to make young products for young people, but to make beautiful products for everyone. And it has worked even better than before. So it does work.
And Harper's Bazaar being the oldest magazine in America. Hello.
I'm not Harper's Bazaar, I just work there, but yes. Yeah.
Did you want to say something, Samira?
No, I think it's that. It's what you say. It's imbuing the things. It's not thinking about, oh, how do you make this young or whatever. It's how do you imbue this thing with the values and standing behind the value proposition. And I just will continue to say it. It will always be good for business, and I think it's the only way forward in this very crowded market. Is to really reach people and to touch them in in a more meaningful way, and then they respond with their buying power.
That's right, and that's an interesting proposal in this discussion, is that the consumer, even though we sometimes don't feel powerful, we are quite powerful in our decisions, and we can actually change, and we can create the trend, correct? So how do you feel about that as a value proposition?
I recently did a talk to students from a university that came to our studio, and they asked always the same questions, like how do we stop fast fashion, right? That's always the question, how do we stop fast fashion? And there were around 20 to 25 students, all in their in college. They were really around 19 to 20 years old. So I asked them to raise their hand. How many of you buy vintage clothes? And they all raised their hand. And how many of you buy fast fashion? And only one or two. I'm like, just put them out of business. Just stop buying it. That is the. We have more garments for everyone to, and it's so exciting to find finds, right, from your own closet to really in vintage stores. So just put them out of business.
Yeah. And you can shop your own closet too, right?
Yeah. Yes, exciting.
A question for all of you. What excites you about what comes next with circularity and this movement of regeneration? Do you feel optimistic or glass half full, glass half empty? What do you see that's exciting that's coming up?
I am very excited about many things. I do think there's a big progress. As I said, before they were not even, now there is in certain groups, there's dead stock organized in the big conglomerate, and I've been part in helping organize some of them. This wasn't even a practice that existed, but when we come back to the issue is not only in the industry where we always talk about, and I've talked to companies from all aspects, Patagonia, everyone in the world. I spoke to all their sustainable departments, and always the same question comes from the energy that it takes to make the product. Everything in this room took energy to make. Everything around us is taking energy. Us being here is taking energy. Where's this energy coming from? Right now, 85% to 90% of the world moves with fossil fuels, but that is changing. No matter if politics are looking one way, it's really, really changing. The progress that's happening in fusion energy and geothermal energy, and if you see the investments that are happening there from the private sector, because we are living in an energy dependency, and that's the reality about climate change. We depend on fossil fuels, and this is why we are where we are. And that dependency is changing. The private sector, which put us in the first place where we are, this happens with the Industrial Revolution, has a responsibility of taking us out. But what I am seeing in abundant clean energy coming in the future, there's going to be all sort of clean abundant energies paying part of this puzzle. Because right now just the renewables that we know, wind and solar, cannot take the demand that we have, but these intermittent energies that are coming, geothermal, fusion, that it's not commercialized yet, but from an impossible to a possible is happening. And the fact that we can take geothermal from other places and hydro, I have nothing against nuclear, by the way, I just have bad PR, I'm for nuclear. And so we are in the verge of having abundant clean energy, and our dependency for fossil fuels is going to stop in a greater degree sooner rather than later. And so that keeps me positive. Even if the headlines and everything sounded another way, but that's really where the private sector is going.
Yeah. Cyrille, I would love to hear from you.
Yes, and I'm full on your page. Let me say also that the cost of renewable energy has really, really shrunk. Now it's cheaper to make renewable energy than to make fossil fuel. Mm-hmm. And we can make a transition that can be sufficiently quick, of course, so we have to make it even faster. Yeah. But that's the good news, because we cannot live without energy. All the cities we have built require energy and electricity. Mm-hmm. Imagine being on a 50 or more floors building with no elevator, you just can't. And everything is needs transportation. So if you see a city like Osaka or Nagoya or Tokyo, you need energy. There's no other way. Otherwise, we have to bring back all people to the countryside, but there are too many, so it will not work anyway. So we need energy, we need clean energy, and it's on the way. If you see also good news that some cities can be depolluted. First time I came to Tokyo, it was 1982. It was one of the most polluted cities in Asia. There were smog every day. The police had an oxygen mask at the crossing. It was really hard. I said, how can I live in such a city? And 30 years later, it's been depolluted. For the big cities, one of the cleanest. You can walk, you can run. You have bees, you have fireflies, you have hummingbirds in the park. It's an incredibly kind of a big, clean city. And it's quiet. So it is possible also to depollute cities. It's been shown. That's also the other good news. And the third thing is, I think, with the good news is that we gradually understand that we should stop wasting, because the biggest part of preservation circularity is not to waste. 45% of the clothes made are destroyed without being worn even once. If also everyone is eating the way Japanese are doing, and Japanese eat 30% less than European for the same size, who eats 30% less than American, and you guys live longer and healthier, and the food is super good. So if we just try to say we change our habit to eat something which is really good, not something bad, and so we can live much better and waste much less food. And Japanese are taught not to waste food from school. Meaning you take the rice portion you need, and you don't take too much that you don't eat. And if you don't eat the rice, you don't eat dessert. That's it. And that's a rule. So there are ways that we know that can be done in a good way. Stop wasting and things are better. And we're getting also better and better understanding regenerative processes, how to regenerate forest and ecosystem and also animals and biodiversity. We understand it, and there are more and more actions to do it in Australia or in this country or in Europe and so forth. So as far as we do all this, and we stop wasting, eat the right food, just don't destroy things. I mean, if the closet is full, if you don't use, give to someone else. Yeah. And that's also the simple thing. We empty the closet and we feel free, and then someone can have the clothes they need. It's very simple. We're getting conscious of that. So clean energy, no waste, discard your closet, help the others, and eat less. And then you feel better. So have to.
Did you want to say something, Gabby?
Yeah, on the eating less, it's like proven medically that your body doesn't, we are still made for when we were hunters and gatherers. Nothing of our brain has changed. So I agree with Cyrille. It's like that we are the healthiest when we don't overeat. Our body, our brains function, our digestive system takes as much energy as our brain.
And again, what's interesting is we've known all of these things all along. Our parents, grandparents, our ancestors have known. So going back to these lessons, I'd love to hear from you, Samira. What do you think is exciting or positive to look forward to?
Well, first of all, I'm going to eat my way through this town, so never mind about eating less. I guess I'm an optimistic person in general, and I always lean into the good, and I always believe that good will prevail. I'm also not an absolutist. I don't think that everyone is going to live this way and it's going to be this big revolution, but I do think that when there are cracks in a system and when you open a doorway to new possibility, you never go back. And there's only forward momentum. And so I believe that my son's generation will do better, that we are going to make it better, and they're smarter, they're wiser, they on the shoulders of giants. I'm my ancestors' wildest dream, and my son will carry that forward. And so while I don't believe that everyone's going to stop, eating seasonally, and everyone's not going to stop buying fast fashion, I think there's enough momentum into a new way, into considering a new way of consuming and of being in the planet, and of considering craft and tradition and exploring a new kind of beauty and a different value proposition. I think that's a revolution, and I'm hopeful that will have momentum and sort of carry forward. And that is exciting to me.
Thank you so much, Samira. Masataka?
そうですね、僕もすごくポジティブに今考えてまして、 やっぱりこう美しいもの、美とかかっこよさみたいなものっていうのは社会を変えてきてると思うんですね。でかっこよさっていうのが表面的で何かこう表面的に見えるかもしれないけど、実はそこって人間がかっこよさを提示して、そこに向けてやっぱ人の価値観って動いてきたっていうものがあって、今例えばボロって昔の着物を継ぎはぎしていったものが非常にやっぱりこう美術の世界でも注目を集めてですね、価値が高まってきている。本当に破れたものをこう補修していく。ただそれが金継ぎのようにですね、狙ったものではないんですけど、そこに美を求める人が今出てきていたり、また織物では先織りって言ってですね、ボロボロになった着物を次カットして糸状にしてですね、またそれを織り込んでいくっていうものもありまして、やっぱりもう何百年もそれを使い続けていくところに美しさがあるっていうふうに、そこの美をですね、いろんな全世界で共有することができるならば、物は捨てられることなく、本当に金継ぎのようにですね、金継ぎもこう割れたっていうネガティブなことを直して美に変えていくってパワーがあるんですね。たまに金継ぎしたいから割ろうとしている人がいて、僕止めたりはするんですけど、それは本来の意味じゃないと。ただやっぱりそういった価値観が変わることによって、美しいお皿も使い続けていく、またそれが思い出になって関係がですね、次世代に紡がれていく、そういうことかなというふうには思います。はい。
Thank you so much. How interesting to see to this discussion go from tradition to modernity, and then understand that all the solutions we're seeking, they're in us. We know them, that they exist there. The most interesting part for me is understanding how to want regeneration, to want circularity, is not something that's just we're doing because we're good, or we want just to be good in the sort of modern sense of the word, but it is because it's in us and it's useful. It's actually a way of life. And that to me was interesting, because how do you convince people to do something, to change habits, for example, and tell them you should do this as it's good for you, but when you know already that's going to change your life, changing habits then becomes part of that process. Cyrille, I wanted to give you sort of this final moment to help us, what we call in America, land the plane. Can you help us land the plane, and kind of what were your biggest takeaways from the discussion today?
I think the biggest takeaway is that we all know what it's about. And whether the question of are things coming from very, very traditional way to make things, or something contemporary, but also taking values from before, basically we know what needs to be done. We know what circularity is about, and we need just to apply it, which means anyway, which is quite difficult when we think differently of things with things we know, even if we know what we know. And it looks easy, but in some way can be the most difficult. And we have to reprogram ourselves for that. But it comes from old textile, or the old way of life in a ranch, of how things were done for architecture and so forth. All these have been experienced before. So we tend to think, and technology helps to invent new things, but in fact it's the spirit that can help us to find the right way to do. Technology can be useful, as you say, for energy, because we need to move to clean energy, and in the past they were not that energy. So if we don't have that, it can be quite difficult. And if we stay with fossil fuel, then the climate change will come too fast, and then we'll make too many disturbance. But if we can move on that side, all the rest is in our mind, and all the rest are recipes we already know. So that's in some way reassuring. Just have to be optimistic about humans, because we like our habits and we don't like to change that much. I say, I know that I have to eat less and work out more. It's still work in progress. And many things are like this. So we know what we have to do, but shall we do it? That's the point. But we know.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think what stayed with me, Cyrille, is that the power is within us to actually do that. And that goes back to the whole Sustainable Development Goal 12, which is what we were talking about today in our conversation, that every individual has the power to make change. And if enough of us do it, then change happens.
We should not wait for the government or the multilateral institution to say, well, if they don't do anything, we cannot do anything. Every individual or private foundations or companies have latitudes to do things that work. And so we should say we are responsible for that, and we have yes, a room for it.
I would add that the arc of progress is really long, right? You never, it's so small and incremental and subtle in the moment, but it's when you can look back after a generation or after a considerable amount of time and that you realize that progress has been made. And so it happens in really subtle, small, forward momentum, enough people caring and enough people leaning into it. And then you look back after a period of time and you think, wow, look at how far we've come. And that's the beauty of it.
That's a theory of the exponential change. It feels like it happens slowly, and then all of a sudden, a whole lake filled up. Gabby?
Yeah, but also on the other hand, if we look at, 5 years ago, we went through a global trauma that was a pandemic, and how fast did we change our habits when we needed to? So we change fast if we need to change fast. So that we proved. So if there's something that came for me from a learning from such a tragedy where there was a pandemic for the millions of people that were lost, is that we can change our habits. Humans are very, very adaptable. So I think that's, if change needs to happen, we can do it fast too.
So humans can change. We've learned this in human history. That's why we survived thousands of years. It's institutions that are hard to change. But humans made the institutions, correct? I wanted to thank you all for a very rich discussion today, and thank you for your attention. How about a round of applause for our speakers?